Right, so the polls are saying Labour are on course for a thumping victory, aren't they? Depending on which poll you look at, which you prefer, you trust more, pick your poison. It's all the same really, but varying between 27 points and 12 points ahead in most recent polls. So there's clearly little actual agreement other than Labour are in front, even though that clearly relies on the methodology of one pollster to another. And that doesn't necessarily reflect reality whatsoever. There are all kinds of factors such polls may not be taking into account. We don't know those methodologies, do we? And I'm betting one of those factors is the Muslim vote losses that Starmer has presided over, in no small part, but not exclusively so, due to his ongoing, apparently immovable position on Israel and Gaza. You see, there's panic going on behind the scenes, where even apparently ultra-safe seats that Labour already hold are now, according to their own website, battlegrounds they need help to hold, including some key figures, and the common denominator between all of them is apparently the large Muslim populations living in these constituencies. So how much damage has Keir Starmer done to Labour's Muslim vote then? And is it actually fair to consider just them, when so many other people are just as disgusted by Keir Starmer and his pro-Zionist politics? Right, so Labour are so nailed on to win the next general election that they are now advertising on their own website that they need help in certain seats that they already hold. And the common denominator is that all of these constituencies have significant Muslim populations, though Labour aren't admitting overtly to that little nugget of information. That has come courtesy, ironically, of a LabourList investigation, which, despite the name, is not connected to the Labour Party. They typically do support them, but are actually a news website completely separate from the Labour Party. And this article is certainly doing Labour no favours, and clearly the loss of the Muslim vote Labour typically enjoys, a significant chunk of in this country, which some months ago was reported to have fallen by half, in no small part due to Keir Starmer and his pro-Zionist stances ongoing concerning Israel and Gaza. And now it looks like it has probably fallen even further since. So I popped onto the Labour Party website to see for myself. Currently the homepage of a horrible gurning image of Keir Starmer holding a baby with the word change underneath. And I'm sat there thinking, well, do we be talking about him or the baby here? Both are capable of creating an horrendous bad smell, but if you scroll down a bit, there's a link saying, I want to help. And if you click on that, you can put your postcode in and see where the nearest battleground seat to you is. So you can do exactly what LabourList has done. It will basically tell you where you could make the most difference if you were so inclined. And, well, I'm definitely not, but there you go. But equally, you may well get a result, not so much pointing you towards a Tory-held seat that Labour has a shot at overturning, as I found down here in Cornwall. You might instead get a message popping up saying, we need your help to hold this seat for Labour. Well, hang on a minute. You, Gov, have just told me that you're a sure thing. You're going to have some 300-seat majority or some such. How come the Labour Party's own website is saying they are struggling to hold on to some of their own seats then? That doesn't make sense. And these aren't necessarily marginal seats either. Some of these are considered ultra-safe seats, big majorities, which tells me, on the face of it, that we could see, well, not dissimilar results come the general election that we've seen certainly in the last two local set of elections, where Labour have made only small gains overall, or stood still in fact, because as much as they gained council seats in some areas, they lost them in others. As much as Labour might gain MPs in some areas at the Tories' expense, therefore, they could lose some of their own MPs they've already got elsewhere in the country. And there are some big names amongst Labour's front benchers who appear to be in the danger zone here. If this help us hold our seats message is anything to go by. Through their investigation, LabourList identified 16 seats where this message is being displayed and discovered that the factor that relates all of them is large Muslim populations. Here's an example. Jess Phillips, in trouble. Oh dear, how sad. Never mind. Jodie McIntyre, I hope, is the young chap giving her grief electorally there. Do check my video out on him. He'd make a far better MP than she has. But Phillips isn't the only big name on the list who's in trouble. Jonathan Ashworth up in Leicester South, the current Shadow Paymaster General, who has a majority of 22,675. This is an ultra-safe Labour seat. Yet he is, according to Labour's own website and the messaging they're putting out, apparently in danger of losing it. A third of the population of his constituency in Leicester South are Muslim. Yet notably, they wouldn't in themselves be sufficient to overturn Ashworth's majority. So as much as LabourList have identified a common denominator in the Muslim vote in large Muslim populations, a correlation there, it is unfair to point the finger of blame for these potential seat losses, if they come to pass, at Muslim voters alone, because so many of the rest of us are equally disgusted by them. I'd caution against scapegoating the Muslim population here. If Starmer's Labour weren't disgusting so many others over his Israel and Gaza stance, we wouldn't be having this conversation. And this video wouldn't have been made at all. And in fact, I'd point to a Muslim rival of Ashworth as the person to look at in that seat by way of a vote recommendation, and consider voting instead for the Green Party's Sharman Rahman. Other big names in danger here, according to the Labour website, are Shabana Mahmood in Birmingham Ladywood, another Birmingham MP like Jess Phillips, the Shadow Justice Secretary no less, and the MP who seconded Jeremy Corbyn's anti-democratic blocking from being able to put himself forward as a Labour MP, that motion having been brought by Keir Starmer himself. Her majority is even bigger than Ashworth's, 28,582. However, 43% of her constituents identify as Muslim. She's being challenged by an excellent independent called Ahmed Yaqub, who ran unsuccessfully for West Midlands mayor, but who still managed to get 20% of the vote in that. So clearly this is a guy who's a danger. Rushanara Ali, the Shadow Investment and Small Business Minister in Bethnal Green and Bow, will be standing for Bethnal Green and Stepney next due to boundary changes. A huge majority she's currently sat on, though, 37,524. Yet she is also apparently on this list of MPs in trouble. And again, a large Muslim population stands out, nearly 42%. She's getting challenged predominantly by local human rights lawyer Tasni Makunji, so best of luck to him there. Now, we could look at all of this and say, well, perhaps Labour are just trying to get people out campaigning, and that is why they are sending messages out like this, to boost support for Starmer's close allies, despite their incredibly large majorities. We also keep getting told that local election results are not a good indicator of general election voting intention, but much like the polls that a lot of people like to cite as clear support for their chosen side, or even if you're not taking a side, read as a sign of the inevitable, an argument that makes me think, well, if you believe that, you should feel free to vote for who you like and ignore calls for tactical voting in which case. But it is a trend across multiple polls over time that actually is the most informative aspect of them. We haven't had many so far since the election was called to do that yet. But we do have those local election results to look at, and trends, just like the polls, can be spotted there too, as much as in and of themselves they may not correlate perfectly well. For example, whilst Labour ostensibly did well last month in the local elections, they did only secure, for example, 2/5 of the lost Tory vote, losing it to the Lib Dems, Green Party and Independents. So they came up short of expectation, and analysis done by Sky on those results makes for some interesting reading as well. Because you see, whilst they freely admit Labour did well, they didn't do well uniformly. And when it came to looking at those areas with large Muslim populations, Labour actually saw a uniform 17.9% drop in their vote across such areas. Now, I don't know how widely Sky looked at that. More widely, I would imagine, than LabourList have. They have more resources. Let's just assume that for a moment. A much bigger organisation as it is. And I would also suggest if Labour were thinking they are in trouble, as seems to be the case by their messaging, they are expecting bigger losses in some seats than just 17.9%. Ultra-safe seats like the three I mentioned before wouldn't be troubled by numbers like that, I wouldn't have thought. In fact, we can point to an example of this that has already happened. LabourList looked at the 20 most populous Muslim areas of the country, and of those, 13 Labour constituency Labour seats are now listed as battlegrounds. But another constituency that falls into this category as well is Rochdale, which George Galloway took with a thumping majority, and where Labour, who held the seat previously, came fourth. Even allowing for the scandal that ensued over that Labour candidate, that was a catastrophic loss, with an independent who actually coming second to Galloway, proving that independent candidates can make a difference at parliamentary level, and there's plenty of them springing up nationwide now, and the Tories, of course, came in third. Are Labour expecting to be, how should we call it, Rochdaled or Gallowayed in a number of other seats with big Muslim populations now as well? LabourList went further looking at this Muslim voter factor and took the 20 safest Labour seats in the country and discovered that 3 of them are now considered battlegrounds, all having those big Muslim populations. And as if to emphasise this point further, Labour NEC representative Mish Rahman said in a response to these findings that Mish Rahman, a member of Labour's National Executive Committee on the left of the party, said, "For far too long, Labour has taken some of these communities for granted and continues to do so, as we have seen from the party's behaviour towards Diane Abbott and Faiza Shaheen. Whenever a candidate is interviewed by the NEC for due diligence, they are asked to explain how any of their actions will be judged by the electorate. But the irony is that Keir Starmer's actions following his awful LBC interview have done unprecedented damage to Labour's chances in some of its safest seats in the country. Labour has lost hundreds of councillors and a number of councils because of those actions, and now risks some of our safest seats. It's tragic that this was completely avoidable and is totally self-inflicted." And of course he's right there. But what will change under Starmer? Not his attitude towards Israel. And as Mish Rahman drew attention to again, that LBC interview, that is going to haunt Starmer for the rest of his days, where Starmer said Israel had the right to commit war crimes, that he denies ever saying, that he still won't apologise for, yet was captured on film, that millions of people I'm sure have now seen. And it is doing massive amounts of damage to Labour's chances. And yet despite all of this, and as the treatment of Diane Abbott now allowed to stand after Starmer and co finally backed down on her case, but also over Faiza Shaheen, who has been replaced now, shows Labour on one hand consider this election to be in the bag, but on another are actually bricking it on the quiet because they're losing ground in their heartlands. The trend of local elections does appear set to be repeated. Labour might largely do well at the general election, but not as well as they should and arguably are being told they're going to on paper. And that could deny them a majority and the hung parliament we need for the electoral reform that we're desperate for to get these Tory and Labour taking turns establishment status quo picture done and dusted and packed off to the history books. It's all on Starmer. He deserves nothing less than to lose the chance of a majority. He does not deserve one in any way, shape or form. And as his treatment of Faiza Shaheen showed, detailed in this video recommendation here, karma is long overdue for him and his shambolic bunch of red Tories. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.